All right, so before we jump into our payment page, I do want to show you two quick things that Figma recently updated, but they're super useful. So the first thing is called swapping instances. So if I go ahead and select one of the instances of the login button we have over here, for example, on the right side, now you can see that there's a new way that you can actually go ahead and change or swap the instance that you want. So I can swap it with a disabled version if I want, or I can go ahead and swap it back to the enabled one. And if I have multiple buttons or multiple components, I can easily find them through here and even use the search bar over here. Now, of course, this will be much more useful once you have multiple variations of different buttons or multiple components that you might want to swap with. Because right now we only have a couple components, it might not be as useful, but it will definitely get more useful as you start adding more components, more different variations of the buttons, and so on. The other really cool thing that I want to show you that Figma recently announced is called variants. So I'm going to really quickly go through Figma's article here on what variants does, and then we're going to go ahead and actually apply it to our own components and our own designs. So variants is a great way to be able to create multiple versions of the same component. Such as the example here that they have in the image, you can actually go ahead and create different versions of the buttons and be able to actually switch them or customize them in your instances very fast and quickly. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. And so as you can see over here in this image, they've created multiple versions of the same buttons, some of them with icons, some of them without. They have secondary versions with different colors, different sizes. And so they've used all these different properties, which you can also see on the right panel side over here, to be able to create different versions of their buttons. But this will make a lot more sense once we actually apply it to our own project. So why don't we switch over to Figma and go to our components tab over here. All right, so back here in our components tab over here or the page, we see two different versions of the buttons that we created. One of them called button/enabled, and then the other one button/disabled. And that's to easily be able to identify which state of the button we want. So we already kind of use the same idea as what variant group provides, but the only difference or the benefit here of using variants is that it's a lot easier to use on the instance side. And also if you have developers working with you or using your designs, they'll be able to utilize this better. And so I'll show you that in a second. So in order to create a variant, you first need two components, which we already have over here. So let's go ahead and select both of them right here. And now you'll see this new option called Combine as Variants on the side over here. So we're going to go ahead and click on this. And what you'll notice back here is that Figma's placed our two button components that we had inside of this button variant. And you can see the name over here. Now, because we were using that naming convention, Figma was smart enough to actually go ahead and turn those into properties of that button. So we have property 1. So because there's no name attached to that property, Figma's just used a generic name property 1 over here, and then gone ahead and used the disabled and enabled version. So if I click on this one, you'll see property 1 is set to enabled. And for this one, property 1 is set to disabled. So first thing I want to do here is select the entire variant group here, and we'll go ahead and just click on property 1 to go ahead and change the name to maybe state. So this is just something that makes more sense. Now we have a property called state, which can be disabled or enabled. Now, of course, we can go ahead and actually create more states if we want. So to do that, we can go ahead and do more options and then go ahead and add a new variant. So this will go ahead and create another variant and go ahead and use state 3, but we can go ahead and name it what we want. So in our case, why don't we go ahead and do pressed? And we can even go ahead and move it up here if you want and move this one down. So now we have an enabled state, a pressed state, and a disabled state button. Now we want to go ahead and actually create something different over here for our press state. So why don't we go ahead and go down to the selection color here, detach the style, and maybe go with a button that's slightly darker. This is just so that when the user taps on that button, it turns into this press state. So now let's say we want another property and we want to actually go ahead and create a small version of our button. So let's go ahead and click on the button variant group over here again, go to more options, and go ahead and click on add new property. And so right below state, now we have a new property. It will ask us to give it a name. So in our case, we'll go ahead and do size. Now the default value for a new property will always be default. So we'll go ahead and actually change that to small and large in just a second. And in order to do that, the easiest way is to go ahead and just select these three buttons while holding down shift. Now we'll go ahead and find the size property over here. Go ahead and click on this little arrow here and go add new. And now let's go ahead and rename this new value to large. Now if you want to create a small version of all of these buttons, let's go ahead and just use Command D to duplicate these buttons. And let's go ahead and just drag the size or the width over here to, let's do 150. That's perfect. And so now, you guessed it, we go over here to the size, go ahead, click the arrow and do add new and create a value of small. So now, as you can see, we have 6 different types of buttons. We have a large button that has an enabled state, a large button that has a press state, and a large button that has a disabled state. And similarly, we have a small button that has an enabled state, a disabled small button, and a press small button. So now you're probably asking yourself, how is this any useful? Well, to demonstrate how it works, let's switch back over to our mockups page, where we can go ahead over here to our login page. All right, so now back here, let's say I want to go ahead and change this button instance over here to a small pressed button. So I can go ahead and select it. And now on the right panel side over here, you see we have our button variant over here. And now we have different properties that we can change. So we can change the state to, let's say, pressed. And we can go ahead and change the size to, let's say, a small one. And so Figma automatically changes that to the type of button we want. Let's say you change your mind and you want that button to be large and show the press state. There you have it. You just have to change one property and you have the button that you want. Now you can do way more with variants, such as adding icons to your buttons and using that as a state. So for example, they have icon false and true here. I hope now you can see how variants can really help us create different versions of our components and how useful it can be. Just to show you some quick last tips about variants, you can actually go ahead and click on the variant over here and resize the window as you like. And you can even go ahead and move your buttons or your components into different places. And so this way it might be easier for you or your team. So feel free to organize your variants in a way that makes sense to you and maybe your design or development team. All right, so just to give you an exercise and get you familiar with variants, I want you to actually go ahead and create a version of these variants with an image as well, and then go ahead and align the text or the button text that we have to the left side of the button. So go ahead and do that for both our large and small variation of the buttons, and then we'll go ahead and do that together in the next lesson.